Hello everybody, we are here at the W-JAX conference in Munich, the big Java conference, and I'm happy to have one of the speakers here, Erik Wilde from Axway. Hi Erik.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Nice conference, and I'm looking forward to have a little chat with you.
Exactly, you just had a keynote on the future of API management, and let's try to have some key takeaways from this keynote. Let's start with API, the notion of API. I mean, APIs can be different things, right? One could very naively say an API, that's a programming interface, so that's a merely technical problem. Why is that not the whole story?
That's a very good question, and it's something I struggle with, so to speak, in my daily job. It's that APIs are different things to different people, and there are a lot of technical definitions, which are technically correct, of course, but then also APIs nowadays have become very important for business. And in that case, an API is much more a business interface, allowing, for example, partners to interface with a company or to conduct business with a company. And then the technical aspect is still there, but it's not the main point, right? So in that case, what you want is you want an API that's mostly working well for the business. And that's also technically fine, right? But you really want to focus on the business aspect. And sometimes this duality between being a technical interface and being a business interface, it's a little hard to manage.
One of your advice here is treat APIs as a product. Yeah? What do you mean by that?
Good question. Yes, I get that a lot. So most importantly, I think, if you look at what product means as a word, right? It means you produce something for consumers, and that's the plural, right? Not just for one consumer, but for a set of consumers, for a market, right? And that means you have to think about who are the consumers that I'm addressing, what are their needs, how do I help them to achieve things, right? So that mindset with a product is always very important. You ask yourself, what are the things that people want to get done? And how can I help them with my product to get this thing done? And if you approach it that way, then your chances of building a good product, which is used by as many consumers as you can reach, are much higher than if you just build something for one consumer and you just focus on that one consumer and say, I'm solving their problem and that's all I care about, right? Then you're building what I call a solution, but not a product. And that's an important difference.
I mean, with this in mind, what makes a good API in the end? It's reuse, one thing, it's scalability. What else? What is your definition of a good API?
I think reuse is that's the product part, right? You want to have something that is reusable, that is addressing a market. And you also want to have something, and that's also very important, that's not just addressing a market, but that's helping your organization. Right? So that's also very important to ask yourself, the thing that I'm building here, how is it driving value for my organization? And how can I design it in a way that it does this in the best possible way? Because in the end, that's your job as somebody who's building a product for a company, right, or for an organization. And it doesn't have to be money all the time, right? So for example, if you're building a public service API, if you're working in some kind of government agency, you still have to ask yourself, okay, I'm spending taxpayer money. How can I best get things done for, let's say, the general public by building an API, right? And that focus on the organizational value is another important part. So not just how do I generate value for users, but also how do I contribute to the value that my organization is actually generating.
What I hear a lot is to focus on developer experience. So it becomes clear that that's not all you can do with APIs.
That's not everything. So yes, it's important. You have to think about developer experience. You have to think about how do I allow developers to use the API easily, to build things easily. But that's really just part of the story, right? So the developers are building an app, and then you also have to ask yourself, well, the app is for users. So which value do I create for users? And then those users interact with my organization. So how does this help my organization to create value, right? And these two are also an important part. And I think if you just focus on developer experience, sometimes those parts are not really focused on enough.
I mean, your talk was the future of API management. Let's talk about API management.
Not just APIs. Yes.
Exactly. What are the trends here in API management? It started with security. Where are we now? What's the future?
I think what we see nowadays is that API landscapes are growing, right? We build more and more software, we network enable more and more things, meaning that we will see a constant growth of APIs over the next several years, right? That's for sure. Probably, I don't know, decades, whatever. So I think that's a trend that this is growing, and also the diversity, I would say, is growing, right? So it started, let's say, if we go back to the early 2000s, it started with SOAP, then we had REST coming in, then maybe after a little while we had GraphQL coming in. Right now we kind of have a wave of event-based APIs, and a couple of years from now we probably have the next thing coming. And I think what's important there is to realize that the important part of an API is not so much the technology, but the important part is just that it's a communication mechanism between two communicating parties. And for API management to be as effective as you can make it, try to abstract from all these things, right? Don't just pick one technology and say we do everything with just REST or just GraphQL. And don't focus everything on just one platform and say we only use this API management platform and none others, because in large organizations you will always have several ones. So I think an important trend in management is to have kind of this unification place where you manage all APIs independently of how they're technically managed and how they're based on a certain technology such as GraphQL.
There are decentralized ways of API management also.
Yes, so if you build it right, in my mind, then what you can do is you can say we have several of these technical solutions running. For example, also because we are large organizations and we have different business units and they just happen to have different solutions in place, and that's fine. But we have a way how we can pull in all this information into this kind of unified catalog where we have software which we call agents, right? So we have software agents running there. So if you update something here, it actually will be updated in the catalog without any manual processes. And we've seen a lot of companies doing this manually, right? Like doing something here and then you send an email and somebody is supposed to update your software catalog. But that typically doesn't scale well. So doing this in an automated way, I think this is something that really helps with making this future-proof.
Mm-hmm. So next point would be consuming the APIs, marketing for APIs. That's what you said in the keynote also. It's one of the most moving parts right now, where we see a lot of new things coming up, like marketplaces or so.
Yeah, so we're betting heavily on marketplaces, right? We just launched one, but we also see other companies doing a similar thing. So it's not that it's not something uncommon, and I think again it's a function of, I think, two major developments. One is that API landscapes are growing, so we understand that with this growing set of APIs, we can drive more value if we make them available to more consumers, and we have to think about how to do that. And we have to take a more proactive role and not just say, oh, you can, good luck in finding them, right? But you really want to help consumers to find them. And the other thing is that also, because we talked about the unified catalog sitting in the middle, right, that pulls in all the APIs from different sources. And with that, we now also have a great place of how we can say, now that we have this unified set of things, we can build different marketplaces on top of it, right? One that, let's say, focuses on external consumers, one that is specifically for one of our partners, another one that's for another partner, another one that's for internal developers. So we have a very flexible way how we can build an architecture that makes sure that we use all the assets that we have in the most flexible way and makes them available so that as many consumers get to find and use them as possible.
Yeah. So you work at Axway, in the Catalyst team. What do you do there to promote this?
It's a question a lot of people are asking me. It's a great job, by the way. I love my job. So what we do is, so we are in that space of API management, but also API marketplaces, right? So that's kind of the area that we're betting on. And my team and my role specifically is to help organizations to better understand how to best use those things. So in many cases, right, it's not just a question of having those software products where you say, well, we have a catalog and we have a marketplace now, everything is going to be great. It's also a question of how do you tell everybody what a good API product is? How do you support them? How do you bring this message across? How do you build tooling that helps them to actually do it so that if you have more and more teams doing it, this scales? And there are a lot of different aspects to what a lot of people often call API programs, which is kind of this overarching structure of making sure you get the most out of APIs. And our role as the Catalyst team is to make sure that organizations are building these API programs in the most effective way. And organizations are really appreciating that because they understand that it's not just about buying the software, it's also about using it in the best possible way. And with us having a lot of experience, talking to lots of customers, being at events like this, right, where you also learn many new things that are very interesting, it's just an interesting feedback channels for organizations. And very often we just have conversations with them. We're not really consulting with them full time, right, but they're just telling us about their API program and they're asking us, well, what do you think? Have we covered all the important parts? And maybe we can give them some pointers and say, well, you might want to consider doing this and that as well. And they like it because they understand that to get the most out of your APIs, you really need this package of good software and also a good idea of what to do with it. And we have both, so that's useful.
Yeah. If you talk to the customers, to the companies, what are the typical issues they have?
A lot is around kind of this disappointment with initial investments. So they may have some API management software in place. Sometimes it's something else, sometimes it's ours, and they're not quite getting out of it what they were hoping for, right? And then they're wondering why, right? Like we see other companies being successful, so what's the matter? And then oftentimes we go in and we look at the APIs, right? We look at, well, let's look at your APIs. Let's look at how APIs get designed. Let's look at how developers are educated to really use APIs and how easy is it for them to find them, right? Because if you're a large organization, you have thousands of APIs. So it's not a trivial task to find it. Even if you know that we probably should have something there, it's not that easy to find. And helping organizations to make this whole ecosystem of these teams who are collaborating through APIs to make this ecosystem more effective and more productive, that's what we focus on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Erik, great. Thank you very much for these insights. Yeah, thank you for the keynote you have here.
Yeah.
And yeah, for all of you, thank you for watching us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Bye, everybody.